This is NICU Babies Parent Support with Catherine Whitaker, a podcast from Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit that provides free personalized support, resources, and community before, during, and after a NICU stay. My conversations here will focus on education and personal stories with medical and hospital professionals, counselors, therapists, and NICU moms and dads from across the country. Whether you're preparing for a NICU stay, you're currently there, or you're months and years past your stay, you belong here. The NICU is hard. We're here to help. I'm your host, Catherine Whitaker, the mom of 6 children, including my very own NICU baby, and I'm so honored you're here. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so happy that you're here. We talked about a big topic last month, didn't we? Preeclampsia. That was a big one. And I gave it, I think, some time for y'all to hear from different people, different perspectives. And because I loved it so much, I thought we'd do it again this month. So this time I wanted to focus on mental health. It gets a lot of press. I mean, certainly post-COVID, post-2020, everyone is talking about mental health. But I think that NICU parents, quite frankly, can we own that? We've been talking about it for a very long time. I know it was something that we absolutely addressed when our son was in the neonatal intensive care unit. And I felt like it was such a big topic that while one guest could absolutely give us great perspective, good wisdom, good advice, I wanted more for y'all. So that's what we're doing. So over the next several weeks, we're going to have a lot of really great resources for y'all, people professionally, as well as people who have gone through counseling, that my hope is that might maybe break some of the stigma, but also might invite you into a conversation that you have not had before or that you have been apprehensive about having. So today's guest, I think, is the perfect way to kick it off. Her name is Regina Boyd, and she's the founder of Boyd Counseling Services, a mental health and coaching practice that provides both in-person and virtual services for couples and for individuals. She works with clients who are experiencing stress, life changes, desire a healthy emotional connection, and seek to develop problem-solving strategies within their relationships. Regina is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she's also a licensed mental health counselor. And she's a featured contributor to the Hallow app and lives in Orlando, Florida with her husband and their beautiful daughter. And with that, let's kick it off. Well, I'm really thrilled to have Regina, you here today. We have a lot to talk about. So I think sometimes people hear the word therapist or counselor and wonder, or I should say this, they have preconceived notions of what they think a therapist or a counselor might be. So maybe let's start there. What is a therapist and what is a therapist not?
Ooh, that's a great question. Because there's a lot of depictions of therapy on TV. And I think the more that they come out, the better they get, but I think there's still a lot of misconceptions there depending on what the show is, what it's depicting. In general, therapists are authentic people, they're professionals, they're unbiased, they're supportive people who can be objective, non-judgmental in assessing you, helping you with whatever your change is, whatever those goals are that you have. But I think they're different than a friend, right? A therapist listens to you, a friend listens to you, but friends can be very biased. Family members can be biased. You know, they're going to jump on your side, as they should, and kind of say, oh, that person was horrible, I can't believe them, right? A therapist is going to have some objectivity to give you an idea. They sort of differentiate from maybe a priest in the sense, priests give spiritual support, guidance. Therapists can do that, but obviously a priest is better trained for that. But similar in that there's privacy there's confidentiality. You don't have to worry about a therapist or a priest going around blabbing around town about what you share. So you have that protection, right? Your friends they may keep it private, they may not. You never know, depending on who it is that shares it.
No, that's good. That's good advice. I mean, I think sometimes your friends definitely say things that you're like, oh, I wish someone had really kept that in confidence. So that's good to know that that's part of it.
Right. A spiritual leader, pastor, whoever. And then I think coaches too, right? Coaches are professional. They provide a plan and they support, but they can't diagnose. They can't treat. And so I think that's really where therapists are different, is that they're applying those research-based methods. They've taken lots of coursework in psychology. They have ethical standards that they follow and guidelines, and they help diagnose, treat, set goals for whatever it is that it is that you're experiencing.
So between, I know there are therapists and then there are licensed therapists. What's the difference between those two?
This is a fun question. I had to think about this one for a while because it made me think back. So when somebody graduates from a therapy training program, mental health counseling, professional counselor, psychology, there's lots of different programs out there. Most of the time, someone is graduating with around 700 hours of experience already. So once they've got that cap and gown, they've had supervision from their faculty, and they've already had work at least roughly a year or possibly more of work by the time they graduate, 60 credits in psychology, mental health, something like that. After graduation, you have to continue accumulating hours. So between that period, between graduation and getting licensed, is a postgraduate period, almost like a residency, if you will. And you get an additional 1,500 hours of work under the supervision of another therapist who is approved by the state to provide you supervision. And you have to meet a minimum of every 2 weeks. For at least a minimum of 2 years or 100 weeks. So you can't speed through and get your 1,500 hours in 5 months and then get licensed. You have to work for at least 2 more years under the supervision of someone else. You pass a national exam, and you have to take some additional coursework as well about the laws and rules of your state, domestic violence. In Florida, we have to take an HIV/AIDS course. And so when somebody is licensed, they've gone through that additional experience and training under supervision. So by the time, so a licensed professional has that additional 1,500 hours of contact with clients.
This is why it's important to read their website or look at their credentials to see where did they do their training. Like if they're getting a certificate off the internet, you might want to rethink that as a person that you want to confide in and help you in many cases heal or process something you don't want someone who hasn't been trained how to do that. So
Absolutely.
1,500 hours, that's a serious commitment.
It's a lot of work,
think
yes.
that it seems like it. So I think you mentioned at the beginning about how there's depictions of therapy in the movies and on TV and how sometimes they have twinges of accuracy, but usually not. So when you are thinking about maybe should I consider therapy, what would be some of the things that you might consider, like if you're displaying certain kinds of behaviors or certain things that you may say that might take more than maybe just me taking, employing self-care or, taking some things off my plate. When should a professional step in? Like what are some of those signs that you say maybe I should reach out to somebody for some professional help?
If you've already been doing the self-care stuff and it still doesn't seem to be helping, you feel stuck, you've tried to resolve the problem on your own, you don't see the changes you want to see, that's a pretty good sign. If in general your quality of life is decreasing in some way, a change in your mood, your sleep, your appetite, even socially, are you withdrawing more than you usually withdraw? Just any type of changes to how you might cope with a situation. Maybe you're drinking a little more, maybe you're overeating a little bit more, seeking out those comfort foods. All of those can be signs that you could benefit from some outside help. Negative impacts on your relationships, your responsibilities. Are you more irritable, getting in arguments with your spouse more, maybe feeling a little lazy with the chores and things like that? All of those things can be signs that you might benefit from therapy.
Yeah. Well, I know that finding someone who's good, I know we talked a little bit about the credentials, but sometimes I think, so someone says, okay, I've recognized those signs. Those are definitely things that I need someone to help me with. But now the bigger question is where do I find someone and how do I know if they're going to be a good fit? So I know that's a big question, but I think it's maybe the biggest stumbling block to people recognizing, yes, I have this thing that's going on and I need to get it resolved or I need to work through that. But now what do I do? How do I find someone? How do I know that they're good?
Hopefully there's someone in your life that you trust that you can ask, who's been open about their experience with therapy, or maybe you know someone who's a friend who's a therapist or has experience in that field. And you could ask, is there somebody you trust that you think might be good for this? because personal recommendations are always best. They know you personally. They might know personality wise who to recommend for you. But absolutely, you want to look for someone who has experience in the area that you're wanting support. And once you're actually meeting with them, I mean, have that consultation call, maybe even go to the first appointment. Just because you go to the first appointment doesn't mean you're locked in and you have to continue working with this person. We understand that you're working hard to find that right fit. So you want to pay attention to, how do I feel with this person? Because the relationship between a therapist and a client is the most important indicator of success. Research has shown this over and over again. And so you really want to pay attention to, how do you feel comfortable with this person? Does it seem like somebody you can click with? And while you're with them, are they listening to your desires, your needs, your goals? Do they accept your feedback? Do they allow your input? Or do you feel kind of disregarded and dismissed in the process? And so I would just pay attention to all of those things to make sure that they're a good fit.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think finding the right fit can really help. I think sometimes people, you hear stories about people who go to therapy and they think, oh, well, because they're a therapist, they're going to be amazing, and they end up walking out with even more challenges, more problems because they didn't take the time, or maybe they just got a bad recommendation. So you can date your therapist, I guess, for a little bit and see if it's the right fit. And if it's not the right fit, find the right one. I think that's a
Right.
good reminder. So there are a lot of NICU parents, Regina, that moms and dads who find themselves feeling depressed or anxious or just a lot of things. And they're like, we have to find a way to work through this, but I just don't know what to do. What would a therapist like give them an idea of like when you say that you're going to therapy, what does that mean? Like how might that help you overcome some of the when we were talking about some of the symptoms that you're feeling, how can you overcome that? What does a therapist do to walk you through that and help you come out better on the other side?
Part of it is sharing your story. And I think that's the stereotypical piece of, oh, we talk about our feelings and, but are we actually doing anything tangible? I think that's part of it. But there's also just the practical elements of, how do I recognize when I'm triggered, when I may be having a flashback? I think when we're talking about trauma, I always use war veterans as an example. So somebody goes to Afghanistan, they experience something, they come back, they're at their 3-year-old's birthday party, and a balloon pops, and we've all seen those scenes. They're yelling, "Hit the deck!" Oh my gosh, right? They have that flashback experience, and everyone's thinking, "What's wrong with you? You're just at a birthday party." And so I think anytime we've been through something really challenging, and I think the NICU can really be like a war zone. I mean, there's a lot of
Yes.
sickness, a lot of injured people, right? And even though they're little tiny people, there's a lot of hurt people all around. And so we can have those moments. And so you want to recognize, what are those triggers for you? How do I handle a situation like that and manage my symptoms? How do I ground myself and come back to reality and earth as quickly as possible when I'm in the midst of that moment? And doing it in a safe way. And I think therapists are really good at that, at making sure we're not pushing too fast or too quickly and just forcing you to talk about all the deep, dark things, because you have to be really careful about the pace, because for everyone it's a little bit different, but making sure we're not opening a Pandora's box and re-traumatizing you in the midst of that. And so it's a really important process of making sure we're aware of those symptoms, but that you also have tools to manage them when they come up, and creating a plan for how you reduce those symptoms so that over time you feel less of a reaction in the midst of a trigger, less likely to avoid reminders of your trauma and things like that slowly over time.
No, I'm glad that you said that. I think sometimes people fear if I go to a therapist, I'm now going to have to unload every single thing that triggers me or that may have even happened before my NICU experience, and that's what holds them back. I think there might be a little bit of a stigma that the pacing, also goes back to the
Right.
kind of therapist that you have that I would suspect that there are many NICU parents right now that can list off 4 or 5 triggers. I know for me, it's the smell of the hand soap. I can
Hmm.
detect that smell anywhere. Your senses are they don't forget, and so we all
Right.
have our triggers. So how do you manage that? So I'm glad to know that in therapy that having coping mechanisms, but also facing what it is that you need to face, and then how do you work through that? This podcast is produced by Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit, but we're more than simply a podcast. Be sure to download our app, join one of our support groups, or find one-to-one support, enjoy counseling, find loss and bereavement support, participate in a peer-to-peer mentor program, or check out our news, articles, and family stories at handtohold.org. All of that is at no cost to you. Hand to Hold's mission is to provide personalized support before, during, and after a NICU stay to help ensure that all NICU families thrive. There are some people who listen to this, Regina, who may feel like, yes, this is an individual decision. I need to go to therapy, whatever. Or they may be listening thinking, man, I really would like to go with my spouse or my partner. So how, I guess, ethically, I have a couple of questions for you. Should you see the same therapist individually and with your partner? Should it be someone different? And which one is better, I guess, or how do you determine which one you need to do first or simultaneously? Those are big questions. I'll let you answer those.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on your preference, what the goals are, what you're working on. Ethically, there's a lot of discussion around that situation of should your couples therapist also be your individual therapist. I think sometimes that can be helpful and sometimes it can. A lot of it has to do with the whole confidentiality thing. So if I'm your individual therapist and your couples therapist, I have to kind of remember and keep track of what do I share or not share when we're all together, with your spouse. And sometimes some of those goals can be contraindicated. So it might not be helpful to keep a secret from the couple's relationship, right? And so we would be talking about that in individual counseling. So again, I think it depends. But honestly, I think couples therapy can be a beautiful experience to share in together, especially when we've been through a difficult experience like a NICU experience. Even if only one of you is experiencing symptoms, to go in there and have a conversation about how do we help each other? How do we support each other? To talk about the impact, even if it's impacted us in different ways. How can we be supportive to one another during this time? How can I communicate my needs when I have a moment or when I need a moment? And so I think it's really unifying to do it as a couple. And individually, I think is nice as well, because in a sense, if you really want to dive deep and focus on just you, then you have more time to do that. But honestly, I'm a little biased. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I'm also a mental health counselor, but I really love couples work. And I think you can do so much in both contexts. It's just a different approach.
Well, since you brought up marriage, I think sometimes I have been around couples where, so my husband and I benefited from marriage counseling shortly after our son was in the NICU, saw many of the symptoms, and we were both like, it was a mutual decision, and I was really grateful for that. But I know I've had a lot of women, particularly, although I don't think it's unique just to the man, but they were like, hey, my spouse doesn't want to go to therapy. Like, I really want to go. I feel like we need it, but they're reluctant to go, or vice versa. It could be the man that says, I really would like for us to seek, some help and some advice. And my wife or my partner is not interested. So how do I guess you overcome that as a couple to say, I really want to do this? Are there certain things that you should do to maybe lessen the stigma? I think that's part of it. But also, I would suspect that there's some people out there who have a partner that's not as enamored and not as excited about going to therapy as their spouse or partner might be.
Yeah, I get it. I think you can always go, if your spouse is not open to it, just go individually. You can talk to the therapist about how you can include your spouse in the process at some point in the future. Perhaps they'd be willing to at least go 1 or 2 times again to have a conversation about how to better support you and your goals. Because I know sometimes there's a stigma there and a discomfort, right? Of, well, if I'm going to therapy, what does that say about me? Does that mean I'm crazy? Am I, and, certainly that's not the case. That's never the case. But if that's a mental hurdle that they're sort of working through, that could be a way to have them at least be on the couch 1 time, right? Can you come and have a conversation with, how you can help me? And sometimes that might put somebody at ease once they've actually met the therapist, seen how it is, and it might hopefully be different than what they're imagining.
Well, it's interesting because 13 years ago when we did that, it sort of felt like a taboo thing. Like nobody talked about the fact that they went to counseling. And now when I mention it, people are like, that's amazing. And so it's such a big difference in the last 13 years since our son was in the NICU as to how open other people are when we say that we've been to counseling or that I think it's a good thing when people share that they have been because I think it gives other people confidence to say, hey, this couple or this person that I really respect and admire, they sought out help. Like you don't have to be. I think sometimes we either think like it must be this dire situation and it's
Right.
the last resort. But I think I think it was a man told me one time the gift that he gave his wife was that he gave her couples counseling. And he said, because I want our
Mm,
marriage to continue to grow and thrive. And I thought, preemptively, we like to walk into difficult situations being as prepared as possible. And I think sometimes when you know that a NICU stay is coming or you get a diagnosis and you look at the statistics and you think, the statistics are stacked against us. What can we do? So
yeah.
I'm glad to know that there are certain counselors who do great work with couples, but also that do great work with couples and partners. That's awesome. Um,
Mhm.
how do you know, Regina, if because this is going back a little bit to the good fit with your counselor? How do you know if what you're speaking about in therapy is actually helping you, or like you said, it's re-traumatizing you, or not helping how do you know when to say, I don't think that because sometimes when you work out, they say it needs to hurt a little bit first and then it gets
Yeah.
better. I don't know if the same adage is true with therapy, but I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about the hurting versus helping and knowing which one is which.
Yeah, I think as long as you're having a conversation with your therapist, again, are they open to that conversation? So if you have a concern or a question, you should bring it up and say, hey, I'm not sure if this is helping. I can't really tell. And ideally, they would help you see if you're making progress. And I think that's one of the best indicators. Are you making progress? Are you noticing a decrease in the symptoms that are bothering you? Are you getting better at managing those symptoms? Are you maintaining? And so we want to see a positive trajectory. And so, is your therapist willing to have a conversation or discussion about those updates, signs of progress, their impressions of what's going on? Are you feeling like you can apply those tools that you're learning in the session outside a session on your own in your daily life? That would be a sign that things are helping, right? That you're learning something and applying it. But or on the other hand, do you feel judged, like information is being withheld, or you feel like a fear of a negative reaction from the therapist if you were to bring up a concern? That might be something we want to pay attention to. Sometimes we have to push those through those fears
Right.
and share them anyway. It might not be as scary as we think it is. And I think that happens a lot with trauma too, is we talk about things that are really uncomfortable, really scary. And so there's this moment in question of, well, is this actually helping? Because I'm not feeling good when we're talking about these sad memories or these bad, heavy topics. But again, we want to look at the trajectory. So there might be moments where we're not feeling great. And because we've reopened some things from our past that are uncomfortable, but now do I have an ability to use some tools in a new way? So I think you want to pay attention to trajectory over time. If you've been working with a therapist for several months and there's no progress or minimal progress, then we really want to call that into question. But one or two sessions, is not going to magically change things overnight. So you really want to pay attention after a few months. This might not be helping if I'm worse or, no progress has been made at all.
Yeah, we used to call that in the NICU, or you trending upward. You have bad
Yes,
days in the NICU. Maybe the machines are all beeping one day and you're like, it's a terrible day, but it's not necessarily an indicator of the entirety of the stay that you dip a little bit, but are the trends showing that you're moving upwards? So I think that's some
exactly.
terminology that all those NICU parents can understand. So when you talk about length of time, seeing a therapist or a counselor, Regina, what is a good barometer of like how often should you see your therapist? How long do you think that you should go? I know that depends on certain situations, but maybe give us some ideas of things that you should look for to help you determine frequency and then longevity.
I really like stacking things up early on in the beginning. So maybe initially when you start meeting, you go every week. So you go once a week for maybe the first 4 to 6 weeks. maybe even 8 weeks, depending on, again, the situation and us working out the plan. But then after that, let's spread it out a bit. Let's go every other week, every 3 weeks, because the idea, in a way, I'm working myself out of a job, is to get you to be doing this on your own and not coming to me for 10, 20 years, right?
Right.
Because that would be really unethical and extreme. So I think there's a lot of momentum, and it's kind of valuable to go every week initially in the beginning. But once you start noticing some momentum, some progress, you're happy with the direction you're going, it doesn't hurt to give some more time in between and see how it goes. But again, I think it depends on what we're working through. So your once a week might last for 3 months, for 6 months, and then after that, slowing it down and spreading some time out.
Right. Well, I think that there's a lot of nuggets in there. I'm going to ask you one last question. I asked this of all my guests at the very end for their advice. So, what's your best advice to someone who's considering or seeking out therapy?
Go. Just do it. It doesn't hurt to check it out, to have that initial phone consultation to learn more. Like I said before, you can stop anytime, but when you go, fully engage in the process. Come prepared, be ready, have that journal, like take notes, practice in between sessions, be open and honest. When else do you get a full hour just to talk about you and have somebody focus on only you in your life, and you don't have to feel guilty about it, and share things that you might not feel comfortable sharing with other people in your life, and analyze and create a plan. And so I would say just give it a try. That's the best way. And hopefully you're pleasantly surprised.
Love it. That's a great way to end it. Regina, thank you for such good advice. That was good, wasn't it? I hope that y'all took a lot from that conversation. In today's 2-minute take, I think I'm going to really just echo what Regina said at the very end was go. If you are feeling overwhelmed, if you are feeling depressed, stressed, traumatized, or if you just need someone to help you process this huge thing that just happened to your family, I can't overemphasize enough Regina's advice of just taking the leap to go. There are a lot of licensed therapists and counselors out there who are ready and willing to hear your story and to help you navigate through that. And maybe you only go a couple of times, or maybe you go for several months, or maybe you go longer than a year. Maybe it's just you, maybe it's you and your partner. But I do know that walking through something difficult, particularly with someone who has the tools and the resources to help you heal from this traumatic event, can be a life changer. It's not just a game changer, it's a life changer. Because I found when my husband and I went to counseling, and this has been 12 or 13 years ago, that many of the things that I learned in therapy and counseling are things that I apply in so many areas of my life. Y'all, I have 4 teenagers now. There are many things that I took from our counseling sessions that absolutely helped me in my marriage, but they helped me in my life. And so I should spell that LIFE. But do your heart a favor and consider the possibility that there may be someone out there who can help you heal and move past the trauma that you experienced and come out on the other side happier, more whole, and healthier. And with that, I will see y'all next time. Thanks, y'all, for listening to NICU Babies Parent Support. Every parent and every experience is welcome here. If you are a NICU parent and you're finding yourself in need of support, please download our app. You can find it in the Apple Store or on Google Play, Hand to Hold. And if you loved today's episode, you can share it, you can subscribe, and you can most certainly review it. We would love, love, love your reviews. It's how we reach more NICU parents. Thanks, and I'll see y'all next time.